Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, China's national legislature has started its annual session in Beijing. Canada has hit back at the United States with retaliatory tariffs of 25%. And the Arab League has adopted an Egyptian plan for reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip. We begin in Asia. China has set its GDP growth target for this year at around 5%, as the country's national legislature started its annual session in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping and other leaders attended the opening meeting. Premier Li Qiang delivered a government work report where he outlined key tasks for the year ahead. Li pledged support for the development of new quality productive forces and artificial intelligence. He also said China will adopt a moderately loose monetary policy and issue ultra-long special treasury bonds to support the consumer trading program. Zhou Jiaxing has details.
The initial agenda of China's top lawmakers' week-long sessions.
2024年
A glimpse of the world's second-largest economy's outlook through 2025.
今年发展主要预期目标是
The main targets for development this year are projected as follows. GDP growth of around 5%, surveyed urban unemployment rate of around 5.5%, over 12 million new urban jobs, CPI increase of around 2%. In setting the growth rate at around 5%, we have taken into account the need to stabilize employment, prevent risks, and improve the people's well-being, as well as the potential for growth and the conditions supporting growth. A target of around 5% is well aligned with our mid- and long development goals and underscores our resolve to meet difficulties head-on and strive hard to deliver.
While delivering the government work report in front of deputies to the National People's Congress, Chinese Premier highlights efforts in promoting new quality productive forces, stressing the resilience of industrial chains, tech-driven growth, and green transition.
因地制宜发展新质生产力
Developing new quality productive forces in light of local conditions and accelerating the development of a modernized industrial system.
China's tech breakthroughs, particularly in semiconductor and artificial intelligence, have been seen as disruptive rise against the backdrop of U.S. strategic bans. Again, the Trump administration this week defies the World Trade Organization, slapping new tariffs on countries, including China. Beijing's stance on upholding the international order is steadfast, and the commitment to independent foreign policy is clear.
扩大高水平对外开放
Expanding higher standard opening up and stabilizing foreign trade and investment.
And the commitment to independent foreign policy is clear.
我们要坚持独立自主的和平外交政策
We will stay committed to an independent foreign policy of peace and to the path of peaceful development. We will remain firm in pursuing a mutually beneficial strategy of opening up, oppose hegemonism and power politics, oppose unilateralism and protectionism in all forms, and uphold international fairness and justice.
The session this year will amend the law on lawmakers themselves, which is believed to translate their good experiences in the past to law and better practice the democracy. The draft law addressing the growth and protection of the private enterprises, especially the tech sector, is also among legislative efforts, aiming to boost China's market economy.
That was Zhou Jiaxing on the Chinese Premier's government work report. U.S. President Donald Trump's new 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada took effect on Tuesday, along with duties on Chinese goods increasing to 20%. China has retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on certain U.S. imports. The government says its countermeasures are legitimate and necessary in defending the country's rights and interests. The measures are more extensive than the previous round in February. Zheng Chunying has more.
We have targeted up to 15% tariffs on a list of U.S. goods. They're all agriculture products, which is still less than proportional to the U.S. tariffs, because let's not forget that the U.S. tariffs targets on all Chinese commodities. So it's a clear message that China is open to more negotiations and dialogue, which is in line with what the NPC spokesperson said earlier, that they're hoping to get all these trade tensions resolved through dialogues and negotiations. And also earlier, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson urged the United States to return to the red path of cooperation and dialogue.
If the U.S. really wants to solve the fentanyl issue, it should consult with China on the basis of equality, respect, and mutual benefit to address their respective concerns. If the United States is ill-motivated and insists on launching a tariff war, trade war, or any other kind of conflict, China will fight to the end. We urge the U.S. to abandon its bullying tactics and return to the right path of dialogue and cooperation as early as possible.
And in addition to the tariff countermeasures, we have also targeted some non-tariff measures, including adding 10 firms to a so-called U.S. unreliable entity list, as well as prohibiting the sale of dual-use items of 15 U.S. entities. And also we have filed complaint to the WTO as well.
That was Zheng Chunying reporting. In North America, Canada has hit back at the United States with retaliatory tariffs of 25%. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has accused Trump of wanting to ruin the Canadian economy and said Canada would challenge U.S. measures at the World Trade Organization. Dan Williams reports from Montreal.
After months of uncertainty, the threat of tariffs has become a reality, and a continental trade war has begun. This time, there would be no last-minute reprieve like there was a month ago. A 25% US tariff on most Canadian goods are now in effect, with a 10% tariff on Canadian energy products. In response, Canada hit back with a retaliatory tariff of 25% on more than $20 billion worth of US goods to start. And in 21 days, a further $86 billion in US goods will be hit. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he will do everything in his power to protect the country's jobs and businesses.
The United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. Canadians are reasonable and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. This is a very dumb thing to do.
The province of Ontario is also taking action, imposing a 25% tariff on electricity it sends to 3 US states, Minnesota, Michigan and New York. Experts predict the trade war impact on the Canadian economy will be severe, while many industries, such as auto, are deeply integrated with complicated supply chains created over decades. There are fears that some factories could be forced to close within a week. A further escalation is already locked in. Starting on March 12th, the US will impose tariffs on steel and aluminum exports to the US, including those from Canada, while further tariffs on agricultural goods and lumber are also looming. And there's more. After Canada announced retaliatory tariffs, the US threatened to match it. US President Trump said Washington's reciprocal tariffs will immediately increase by a like amount. For locals here in Montreal, there is a sense of anger and concern.
I think it's mostly fear and incomprehension between why now starting this. It will cost jobs, money, there's no benefit for either country.
It'll impact the consumer first and foremost, make everything more expensive. I think both sides of the border. Even though it hurt us more than it hurt the U.S., it'll hurt our dollar, making, again, everything more expensive, adding inflationary pressure to us. So I don't think it's a way about going about doing business with your largest trading partner.
Canada and the US are now in a full-blown trade war. Businesses, industries and residents on both sides of the border are about to discover just how damaging these latest developments will be.
That was Dan Williams in Montreal. In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum says she will announce countermeasures against U.S. tariffs on Sunday. Christian Daza is an independent journalist for ChecaTesta.com, a Mexican news website focusing on the country's politics and social issues. He says the Mexican working class will be the most affected by the U.S. tariffs.
Well, I think the result of this negotiation is that Mexico sent to I don't know if it was a negotiation or an imposition, but it was Mexico sent to the U.S., I don't know if you heard, 29 drug lord kingpins. So the threat was we are going to impose those tariffs. But in the other hand, Mexico government said, we have these 29 drug lords that we can send you to your country if you're happy with that. And about the tariffs, I think that is not a punch to the Mexican government. I think it's a punch to the working class in my country, because we know that there are a lot of companies threatening to leave the country if U.S. apply these tariffs. Of course, the decision will lay off a lot of workers here in Mexico. And we know that, unfortunately, our economy is not in a good mood. So we are afraid of those tariffs. And we think that the answer of our Mexican president is not correct, or is incorrect, when she says that Mexico will also apply tariffs to the U.S. I think that, that's not the point. And we know that they are different economies. There's a proverb here in Mexico that claims that if U.S. has a cold, Mexico will have pneumonia. And I hope our negotiation teams will get together and reach an agreement.
That was reporter Christian Daza speaking about the impact of the U.S. tariffs on Mexico. Turning to Europe, European leaders have reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine, agreeing to continue military aid and increase economic pressure on Russia. They argue that these measures are necessary to support Ukraine and achieve a just peace. However, this approach has raised concerns in Moscow. Sun Tianyuan reports.
The decision by European leaders to provide additional military aid to Ukraine has sparked criticism in Russia. Vladimir Karashov, a foreign affairs expert in Moscow, says the move will only deepen the conflict.
It seems that Europe and Ukraine are determined to continue the war rather than pursue peace. True stability will only come when leaders in the European Union recognize that they can no longer resist the reality of a multipolar world.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky received strong backing from European leaders during his visit to London. This was in stark contrast to his public spat with U.S. President Donald Trump last Friday. Dr. Vladimir Puryakin from the Russian State University for the Humanities says Zelensky did not fully account for the shifting dynamics in America's foreign policy.
He completely failed to grasp the shift in U.S. attitudes toward Ukraine. European leaders, who have long aligned themselves with Washington, are now uncertain about how to navigate Trump's changing foreign policy stance.
Later this week, European leaders will gather in Brussels to discuss next steps in handling the Ukraine crisis.
While leaders push for their vision of peace, regular folks remain caught in the uncertainty of this ongoing crisis, with no immediate resolution in sight.
I'm not sure that it will be in the nearest half of a year.
Yeah, and another way is to continue all this stuff for years and years.
We hope that it ends soon, because it affects a lot of people, and a lot of people die from our side, from their side, and from different countries.
That was Sun Tianyuan reporting. Finally, on the Middle East, the Arab League has adopted an Egyptian plan for reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed strong support for it to go through. The $53 billion draft proposal provides a detailed roadmap for how to rebuild the coastal enclave while keeping its nearly 2 million citizens inside the territory. It stands in sharp contrast to an earlier deal presented by the Trump administration that called for the forced relocation of the entire Palestinian population in Gaza. Abd al-Marouki has more.
Egypt wants Arab leaders, the United Nations, the European Union and African Union to support its comprehensive reconstruction plan for Gaza. The proposal would involve removing the rubble and rebuilding damaged homes for millions of displaced Palestinians. It also includes forming a transitional governance committee until the Palestinian Authority returns.
This committee will supervise the aid process and temporarily manage the enclave's affairs. This is to prepare for the return of the Palestinian Authority to the enclave. Egypt is also keen to train Palestinian security caliber who will be tasked to maintain security there. In parallel, this plan must be accompanied by a peace track that aims for a fair, comprehensive, and sustainable settlement for the Palestinian crisis.
As part of the Egyptian plan, temporary housing units will be constructed to ensure Palestinians are not displaced outside Gaza. Meanwhile, at a summit on Tuesday in the new administrative capital, Egypt called on all sides involved in the conflict to reach a truce to end the fighting.
This summit is an important signal that the world has a collective responsibility to support efforts to end this war, relieve profound human suffering, and secure lasting peace. We must avoid at all costs the resumption of hostilities that would plunge the millions back into an abyss of suffering and further destabilize the region. And simultaneously, the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria must be respected. Serious negotiations for the ceasefire in all its facets must be resumed without delay.
Cairo's 121-page draft proposal included AI-generated visuals of how Gaza would look like years from now. Beach resorts, a seaport, and comprehensive economic construction are part of the plan. Egypt estimates the reconstruction of Gaza can be completed by the year 2030.
Almost all participants have endorsed the Egyptian plan. They believe that the establishment of an independent Palestinian state is the only way to ensure lasting peace. In April, Egypt will be hosting an international Gaza reconstruction conference to raise finances for its 5-year, $53 billion vision for Gaza.
That was Abdel al-Marouki on the Arab League's recent endorsement of a Gaza reconstruction plan. Now, a reminder of the headlines before we go. China's national legislature has started its annual session, setting this year's GDP growth target to around 5%. Canada has hit back at the United States with retaliatory tariffs of 25%. And the Arab League has adopted an Egyptian plan for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thank you for listening.